Millionaire's arranged marriage turns shocking. He spends the night with his bride's virgin maid. Hello, my beautiful family. First of all, I love you all so much. You are not just my viewers. You are my sweet, loving family, and I am truly grateful for each and every one of you. Today, I bring you another heart-touching, emotional, and romantic story that will take you on a journey of love, passion, and unexpected twists. If you believe in me and trust my storytelling, then please watch this story till the end. I promise, I will never disappoint you. Every scene, every moment is crafted with love just for you. And at the end, if you enjoy this story, please share my channel with your friends and family and help me grow our beautiful Alcott Stories family. Your support means everything to me. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching me from? I would love to know. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's incredible love story. With love, always, Alcott Stories. Love. The grand hall of Blackwood Estate shimmered with golden chandeliers, their crystal reflections casting a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. The scent of fresh roses and expensive perfume filled the air as high-profile business tycoons, socialites, and celebrities gathered to witness the union of two powerful families. Laughter echoed through the vast room, accompanied by the soft melody of a live orchestra playing romantic tunes. The wedding of Aidan Blackwood, the billionaire CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, and Sophia Monroe, the stunning heiress of the Monroe Empire, was nothing short of a royal affair. Aidan, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, stood among the guests, his posture straight and composed. His chiseled jawline, piercing blue eyes, and towering physique made him the center of attention. But despite the grandeur of the night, a dull exhaustion crept over him. He had endured hours of rituals, endless greetings, and countless congratulations. Yet there was an unsettling emptiness lingering in his chest. This was supposed to be the happiest night of his life, yet he felt nothing. Sophia, his bride, was the epitome of grace and sophistication. Her diamond-studded white gown shimmered under the ballroom lights as she danced and laughed with her friends, her champagne glass never empty. Her smile was radiant, but Aidan couldn't shake the feeling that she was more in love with the attention than with him. Every now and then, she would cast him a look, but there was no warmth, no anticipation for the night they were about to share. With a quiet sigh, Aidan loosened his bow tie and made his way through the crowd, unnoticed in the sea of laughter and chatter. He needed a moment away from the pretense, a moment to clear his thoughts. As he ascended the grand staircase leading to his private suite, the scent of fresh roses grew stronger. The mansion's staff had decorated his room with delicate floral arrangements, soft candlelight, and satin sheets, setting the perfect atmosphere for a romantic first night. But as he stepped inside and closed the heavy oak doors behind him, he was greeted with a wave of silence that only deepened his solitude. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, exhaling deeply. He was supposed to wait for his bride, but something in him felt disconnected from the reality of his marriage. He loosened his vest, walked over to the plush king-size bed, and sank onto it, his mind clouded with thoughts. At the same time downstairs, a different kind of beauty entered the mansion. Isla Ramirez, Sophia's personal maid, stepped hesitantly through the grand entrance, holding a tray of delicate gifts wrapped in silk. Her brown skin glowed under the chandeliers, and her long, silky dark hair cascaded over her slender shoulders. Unlike the women in the hall, dressed in extravagant gowns and adorned with diamonds, Isla's beauty was natural, unpolished, yet breathtaking. She wore a simple but elegant red dress, a gift from Sophia, so she wouldn't look out of place at the high-class event. Her heart pounded as she took in the lavish surroundings. This world was not hers. She was here only to serve, to remain unnoticed. But as she clutched the delicate velvet boxes filled with Sophia's wedding jewelry, she couldn't help but feel an unexplainable nervousness crawling under her skin. Sophia had given her a simple order. Take these to Aidan's room, place them carefully on the dresser, make sure everything is perfect. Isla nodded without hesitation, always eager to do her job efficiently. She moved quickly through the hallway, her footsteps light against the marble floor. The long corridor leading to Aidan's suite was eerily silent compared to the lively celebration downstairs. She took a deep breath before pushing open the door to his room. She had no idea that she was walking straight into fate. As Isla stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. The room was dimly lit with soft candlelight, the scent of roses heavy in the air. The atmosphere was intoxicatingly romantic, but she was too focused on completing her task to admire it. She moved toward the large mahogany dresser, gently setting down the expensive jewelry boxes. And then she turned. Her heart stopped. Aiden was there, standing near the bed, his piercing gaze locked onto her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to freeze. Isla's lips parted slightly in shock, her fingers trembling. She hadn't expected him to be here. She had assumed he was still at the party. Her mind screamed for her to apologize, to step back and leave immediately, but her feet refused to move. Aiden, on the other hand, felt something shift inside him. His exhaustion, his detachment from the night, all of it vanished the moment he saw her. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her beauty wasn't the kind that needed extravagant jewels or designer dresses. It was raw, untouched, breathtaking. The way her red dress hugged her frame, the way her dark eyes widened in fear and innocence, the way her lips trembled slightly, it all ignited something primal inside him. Without realizing it, he took a step closer. Isla felt the air grow thick with tension, her body frozen in place. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to disturb you. I was just delivering the gifts. Aiden didn't answer. He just kept staring, his blue eyes burning with something she couldn't decipher. Then in a deep, husky voice, he said the words that would change everything. I love you. Isla's body went rigid. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Did she hear him correctly? She took a small, shaky step back. Sir, I think you're mistaken. I am just a maid. Aiden closed the distance between them. His hand reached out, his fingers gently brushing against hers, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm. Isla sucked in a breath, her body betraying her as a shiver ran down her spine. No, Aiden whispered, his voice deep and firm. I'm not mistaken. His thumb traced over her trembling fingers, his touch light yet possessive. Isla tried to pull away, but her legs felt weak. Her mind told her to run, but her body, her heart, wanted to stay. In that moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken desire. Neither of them noticed the world outside. Neither of them remembered that just below them, an entire wedding party was celebrating a different future. In that moment, the only thing that existed was them. And fate had just begun its dangerous game. The room was wrapped in a breathless silence, broken only by the flickering of candle flames and the faint rustling of silk curtains as a cool breeze slipped through the open balcony doors. Aiden's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he stood frozen in place, his piercing blue eyes locked onto the breathtaking woman before him. His entire world shifted in that moment. He had always believed love was something calculated, a partnership based on wealth, power, and mutual benefits. His arranged marriage to Sophia had been exactly that, a logical decision, not a matter of the heart. He had never expected to feel this way, to have his breath stolen by a single glance, to have his heart pound like a desperate man drowning in a sea of emotions. But now as he stood before Isla, he felt something he had never felt before. His voice came out before he even realized what he was saying. I love you. The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on both of them. Isla's entire body stiffened, her lips parted in shock, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. Had she heard him correctly? Did the powerful, untouchable billionaire, the man who had just married one of the most elegant women in the country, really just confess love to her? Her breath came in shallow gasps, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She took a step back, gripping the edge of the dresser behind her, as though it could anchor her to reality. Sir, I don't understand, she stammered, her voice trembling. I am just a maid. I didn't know you were here. I was only following orders. Aiden moved closer. His towering frame made her feel so small, fragile, vulnerable. But it wasn't fear that paralyzed her. It was the way his gaze burned into her, the way his deep, husky voice sent a forbidden thrill down her spine. I don't care who you are. His words were firm, laced with an intensity that made her knees go weak. Then before she could react, his hand reached out, capturing hers. The moment his fingers touched her skin, a jolt of electricity shot through her body. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Aiden's grip was gentle, yet possessive. His thumb slowly brushed over her knuckles, his touch sending fire through her veins. Isla's body betrayed her, her skin burning where he touched her, her heart fluttering like a trapped butterfly. I don't know what's happening to me, Aiden murmured, his voice thick with raw emotion. But I know that I've never felt this way before. Isla's head spun. This couldn't be real. This man, the same man who was supposed to be lying in bed with his wife tonight, was looking at her as if she was the only woman in the world. Her lips trembled. Sir, please. This isn't right. Aiden let out a soft, humorless chuckle. Isn't it? He took another step, closing the space between them. His scent, rich, musky, intoxicating, surrounded her, wrapping around her like a spell. Isla pressed herself against the dresser, trying to create distance, but he was so close now. So close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. So close that if she leaned just a little, her cheek would press against his broad, solid chest. Tell me you don't feel it too, Aiden whispered, his fingers grazing the sensitive skin of her wrist. Isla's breath shuddered. Her entire body was betraying her, her lips quivering, her skin burning, her heart hammering so loud she feared he could hear it. She wanted to run. She wanted to remind him that he was a married man, that he belonged to Sophia, but the words refused to leave her lips, because the truth was, she did feel it, the intensity, the heat, the aching desire to melt into his touch, and that terrified her. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Aiden tilted his head, his blue eyes searching hers, and then, slowly, his fingers trailed up her arm, leaving a scorching path of fire in their wake. Isla shivered. Her entire body was alive in a way it had never been before. Her breathing grew shallow as Aiden lifted his other hand, gently cupping her face. His touch was soft yet commanding, his thumb brushing along her cheekbone. His gaze flickered to her lips. A tense silence filled the air, thick with anticipation, with something dangerous and forbidden. Isla should stop him. She should push him away. She should remind him who he belonged to. But instead, she stood frozen, drowning in his touch. Aiden's fingers tightened ever so slightly against her waist, pulling her just an inch closer. Tell me to stop, he whispered, his voice dark and laced with desire. But Isla didn't, because deep down, she didn't want him to. Her hands trembled at her sides, her body betraying her heart's desperate plea to resist. She tried to fight the warmth pooling deep within her, tried to convince herself that this was wrong. But when Aiden's forehead pressed gently against hers, his breath warm against her lips, her resolve shattered. A quiet whimper escaped her lips, a sound so soft yet so filled with need that Aiden let out a low, deep groan. Isla, his voice was a plea, a confession, a promise. Her name rolled off his tongue like a prayer, like something sacred, and in that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no grand wedding, no expensive champagne, no elegant bride waiting downstairs. There was only them, two souls colliding in the most unexpected, most forbidden way. And neither of them knew how to stop it. The air between them grew thick with tension, charged with an electricity neither of them could ignore. Isla's breath hitched, her chest rising and falling rapidly as Aiden tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his piercing blue gaze. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This is wrong, she whispered, her voice shaking, but the words felt hollow, as though she were trying to convince herself more than him. Aiden didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes roamed over her face, memorizing every curve, every quiver of her lips, every flicker of doubt in her wide, dark eyes. Then, without another word, he leaned in. His lips grazed her forehead, a soft, lingering kiss that sent a shiver racing down her spine. Isla gasped. It was just a kiss to her forehead, and yet it felt intimate, dangerous. intoxicating. Her hands trembled at her sides, her body betraying her completely. She should run. She should push him away, remind him that he belonged to another woman. But her feet refused to move. Aiden pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers for hesitation. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice so low, so deep, it sent a tremor through her entire being. Tell him to stop. That was all she had to do, but the words got caught in her throat. Isla opened her mouth, her lips parting, but nothing came out. She couldn't, because the truth was, she didn't want him to. Aiden's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips. He lifted his hand, his thumb brushing gently against them, tracing the soft curve. Isla inhaled sharply. A warm, delicious heat spread through her, curling in the pit of her stomach, leaving her breathless and lightheaded. Aiden took another step closer, his body heat wrapping around her, pulling her deeper into this forbidden moment. His hands moved to her waist, sliding over the delicate fabric of her dress, his fingers sinking into her curves. The warmth of his touch burned through the fabric, branding her in ways she had never known before. Isla's pulse skipped, then raced. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, her body tense with both fear and something else, something dangerous and consuming. "You feel it too," Aiden whispered. It wasn't a question. She knew exactly what he meant. The air between them crackled with a tension so thick, so intoxicating, it threatened to pull them under. Isla's voice wavered, but she couldn't finish. Aiden lifted his hand, cupping the side of her face, his thumb grazing her cheek. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he held her too tightly. "I don't care about right or wrong," he confessed, his voice husky, raw with need. "All I know is that I've never felt like this before." Isla's stomach clenched. Every part of her screamed that this was a mistake. But then Aiden's fingers slid lower, tracing the delicate curve of her jaw, his touch leaving a trail of fire and longing. Her knees went weak. He was so close now, close enough that she could feel his breath fanning across her skin, close enough that the scent of his expensive cologne wrapped around her, drowning her in him. Aiden leaned in again, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear. "Tell me to stop," he murmured again, his breath warm, his voice dripping with desire. Isla's hands flew up, pressing lightly against his chest. She should push him away, but instead, her fingers curled into the fabric of his crisp white shirt. Her body betrayed her. Aiden pulled her closer, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, holding her against him. She felt his heartbeat, steady and strong, thudding against her own erratic pulse. The world outside disappeared. The wedding, the guests, Sophia's presence in the same house, none of it mattered anymore. All that existed was this moment. Isla's lips parted, a shaky breath escaping her. She was drowning, suffocating under the weight of her own desires, trapped between her morals and the overwhelming need to surrender. And Aiden could see it. He could see the internal battle raging inside her. And yet, she didn't move away. Aiden leaned down, his lips just a breath away from hers, their noses brushed. Isla's heart slammed against her ribs, the anticipation so intense it was almost unbearable. And then, Aiden kissed her. It wasn't rushed or forceful. It was slow, deep, intoxicating. A kiss that whispered of forbidden temptations and stolen moments. A kiss that shattered every boundary Isla had so desperately tried to keep between them. A kiss that ruined her. Isla's body melted against him, her fingers clutching at his shirt, her breath hitching as his lips moved against hers with agonizing slowness. Aiden let out a low groan, his grip tightening around her waist. He pulled her closer, his body molding into hers, as if she was the only thing he had ever wanted. Isla whimpered against his lips. She should stop. She should run. She should tell him this was a mistake. But instead, she kissed him back. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Sophia, not the wedding, not the consequences that would come crashing down in the morning. For now, there was only this stolen, forbidden moment. A moment she knew would change everything. The world outside ceased to exist. In that moment, it was just Aiden and Isla, two souls caught in a whirlwind of forbidden passion, drowning in a desire so intense it burned through every rational thought. Aiden's breath was ragged as he stared down at Isla. His piercing blue eyes darkened with longing. His hands trembled slightly as he traced his fingers along her jaw, memorizing the softness of her skin. "I can't stop," he admitted, his voice raw. "And I don't want to." Isla's lips parted, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her own rapid breaths. "This isn't right," she whispered, but her voice was weak, betraying the war raging inside her. Aiden leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Then tell me to stop," he murmured again, his voice so low, so deep it sent a violent shiver down her spine. Isla opened her mouth, but the words refused to come. She knew she should push him away, remind him of the vows he had taken just hours ago. But instead, her fingers curled into his shirt, clinging to him as if he were the only thing keeping her tethered to the ground. Aiden groaned, the sound deep, tortured, desperate. His restraint was hanging by a thread, and then the thread snapped. With a sudden, fluid motion, Aiden scooped Isla into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. A gasp escaped her lips, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck as he carried her toward the luxurious, king-size bed, adorned with silk sheets and the soft scent of fresh roses. Isla's heart pounded wildly as he gently placed her down, his body hovering over hers. The room was dimly lit, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows across their entwined figures. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath stolen between them, laced with forbidden desire. Aiden's fingers traced her cheek, his touch reverent, worshipping. "I've never felt like this before," he confessed, his voice husky, strained. Isla's eyes fluttered closed as he pressed a kiss against her jaw, then her collarbone, each touch branding her, ruining her. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, her body trembling beneath his. She wanted to stop this. She wanted to remind herself that he was married, that this was wrong. But how could something so wrong feel so intoxicatingly right? Aiden kissed her again, this time with unrestrained passion, his lips demanding, consuming. He tasted of desire, of temptation, of everything she had ever been forbidden to want. And Isla? She kissed him back. Her fingers wove through his hair, her body arching into his, giving in to the flames that had been ignited between them. Meanwhile, downstairs, laughter and music echoed through the grand halls of the Blackwood estate. Guests raised their champagne glasses, toasting to the newlyweds, completely oblivious to the betrayal unfolding above them. Sophia, the bride, sat with her closest friends, a cocktail in hand, her laughter ringing through the room. She had spent so much time entertaining guests, posing for endless photos, and reveling in the glory of her extravagant wedding that she had barely noticed her husband's absence. One of her friends, a beautiful brunette in a tight emerald dress, leaned toward her. "Sophia, where's Aiden? Shouldn't you be with him? It's your wedding night." Sophia rolled her eyes, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. Aiden's probably exhausted. He's not the type for all these social gatherings." Her friend smirked. "But he is the type for a wedding night, isn't he?" Sophia laughed, tilting her head back as she took another sip of her drink. "Let him wait," she said with a playful grin. "Besides, I need more champagne before I deal with being a wife." Her friends joined in her laughter, completely unaware that while she sat drinking, lost in meaningless gossip, her husband was upstairs claiming another woman. As the night dragged on, Sophia grew tipsy, her speech slurred, her laughter turning softer. Eventually, exhaustion won over, and she curled up on the couch, falling into a deep, drunken sleep. She never once thought to check on Aiden. She never once imagined that while she lay passed out, her husband was lost in the arms of another woman. Back upstairs, Aiden's hands explored Isla's body with unspoken reverence, his lips trailing a path down her neck, leaving burning kisses in their wake. She shuddered beneath him, her breath coming in short gasps as she gripped his shoulders, holding on as if she were drowning in him. "Aiden," she whispered, his name a plea, a surrender. Aiden groaned, his lips finding hers once again, deepening the kiss as his body pressed into hers. He wanted her, more than he had ever wanted anything, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the wedding, not Sophia, not the consequences that awaited them in the light of day. There was only this night, this forbidden passion, this irreversible mistake, and neither of them wanted to stop. A shocking awakening. The morning sunlight filtered through the luxurious silk curtains, casting a golden glow over the grand bedroom. A cool breeze whispered through the open window, ruffling the sheer drapes as if carrying the secrets of the night before. The air was thick with the lingering scent of roses, vanilla, and something far more forbidden: passion, desire, and betrayal. Isla's long lashes fluttered as she stirred, feeling the warmth of a strong arm wrapped securely around her waist. The rhythmic rise and fall of Aiden's chest pressed against her bare back, his slow and steady breathing a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. Her eyes widened in horror. This was not a dream. It was real. Last night had been real. A harsh gasp escaped her lips as the reality of her actions came crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Her body tensed beneath the silk sheets, her fingers clutching them desperately as if they could shield her from the truth. She had slept with her mistress's husband. Her body, still humming from Aiden's touch, was a painful reminder of her sins. What have I done? Isla's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her like a heavy stone. She turned her head slightly only to be met with Aiden's gorgeous, peaceful face, his dark lashes resting against his chiseled cheekbones, his lips slightly parted as he breathed in deeply. He looked content, as if he had no regrets. But Isla did. She had betrayed Sophia. Her hands trembled as she slowly tried to move, to untangle herself from Aiden's possessive grip. But the moment she shifted, his strong arm tightened around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His breath was warm against her neck as he murmured sleepily, "Stay." The word was soft, yet commanding. Isla's entire body stiffened. "No," she whispered, panic setting in. "I can't. I have to." Aiden's grip loosened, and Isla seized the moment to slip out from under the covers. Her bare feet hit the cold marble floor, sending a sharp chill up her spine. She scanned the room in desperation, her heart hammering as she searched for her clothes, discarded recklessly across the expensive carpet. She needed to get out. She needed to disappear before anyone saw her. But just as she grabbed her dress, the bed shifted behind her. She turned only to find Aiden sitting up, his toned body partially covered by the silk sheets, his piercing blue eyes locked onto her. His gaze was unreadable, and yet something burned behind those irises, something possessive, something unchangeable. "You're running from me," he said, his voice still heavy with sleep, yet firm. Isla's throat went dry. I need to go," she whispered. "This was a mistake, Aiden. We can't—" Before she could finish, he was out of bed in one swift motion, his bare feet patting against the floor as he closed the distance between them. He tilted her chin up, forcing her gaze to meet his. His touch sent a shiver down her spine, a sinful reminder of what they had shared last night. His voice was deep, unwavering. "I don't regret it," he said, "and neither do you." Isla's breath hitched. She wanted to deny it. She needed to deny it. But the truth was written all over her face. She hadn't just fallen into Aiden's bed last night. She had surrendered. Completely. And that terrified her. She opened her mouth to respond. Bang! The bedroom door slammed open. A gasp tore through the room. Isla's entire body went rigid. Aiden's grip on her tightened. And then, a horrified voice filled the air. "Oh my God!" Sophia's shattered world. The world stood still. Sophia Monroe, still dressed in her wedding gown, stood frozen in the doorway. Her ocean blue eyes darted between her half-naked husband and the trembling maid standing in his arms. Her lip quivered. Her knees buckled. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. She took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. "No, no, this can't be real." Her voice cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked at Aiden, begging him, pleading for an explanation. But he said nothing. He didn't even flinch. And that destroyed her. Sophia's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her flawless skin. She turned to Isla, her chest heaving. "You," she whispered. Her voice was sharp, venomous. Isla flinched. Sophia's expression contorted, her sorrow morphing into rage. "You filthy, disgusting—" Aiden stepped between them, protecting Isla. Sophia let out a broken sob. Her husband, her brand new husband, was protecting his mistress. Not her, not his wife. The realization shattered her. Her breath came out in harsh, uneven gasps as she stumbled back. "You ruined everything," she whispered, tears falling freely now. Aiden met her gaze without hesitation. "I never loved you, Sophia," he said. "Our marriage was a business deal, nothing more." Sophia let out a choked, pained laugh. "And what is this?" she spat. "Some kind of sick fantasy? You choose her, a maid, over me?" Aiden didn't blink. "Yes." Sophia's body shook. Her perfect life, her perfect marriage, had crumbled within a single night, and Aiden didn't even care. Her heart cracked into a million pieces. Her hands trembled as she backed away, her face a mask of devastation. And then, she turned and ran from the room. Her sobs echoed down the hallway, a chilling reminder of the damage done. Aiden's final decision. The silence left behind was suffocating. Isla's hands trembled as she turned to Aiden. Tears welled in her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Aiden, what have we done?" Aiden reached for her, cupping her face gently. "We've started something that can't be undone," he said, "and I don't regret a second of it." Isla's heart shattered and swelled at the same time. She had just ruined everything, and yet, she knew one thing for certain: Aiden Blackwood had claimed her, and deep down, she had claimed him too. A wife's broken world. The grand hallway outside the bedroom echoed with the sharp click-clack of Sophia's designer heels as she stormed away. But something unbearable, pulled her back. Her heart thumped painfully against her ribcage, a deep, hollow ache spreading through her chest. She couldn't run from this. She had to face it. Tears stung her eyes, but she spun on her heel and marched back to the doorway. With one forceful shove, she pushed the door wide open, and there they were. Her brand new husband, Aiden Blackwood, still half naked in bed, and beside him, her maid, Isla. The sheets barely covered Isla's trembling figure, her long brown skin glowing under the morning sunlight, her wide, guilty eyes refusing to meet Sophia's burning glare. It was all too much. Sophia's vision blurred as the raw betrayal settled into her bones. Her fingers dug into her palms. Her lip quivered. And then, her pain exploded into rage. "How could you?" Her voice tore through the room like a violent storm, sending shivers down Isla's spine. Sophia's breath came in ragged gasps, her body shaking as she stared at the man who had vowed to be hers. "How could you do this to me, Aiden?" she screamed, her voice cracking with pain. "On our wedding night?" Isla flinched, gripping the sheets tightly around her body, as if they could shield her from Sophia's wrath. But there was no escape. The truth was out. The damage was done. Aiden, in contrast, remained calm. Too calm. He stood from the bed, his sculpted chest rising and falling steadily, his expression unreadable. Then, with chilling ease, he uttered the words that would destroy Sophia completely. "Sophia, I'm sorry, but I love Isla." Shattered beyond repair. Sophia froze. Her heart stopped beating. Her breath caught in her throat. No, this isn't happening. A cold, sharp pain pierced through her chest, as if someone had ripped her heart out and crushed it in their fist. She stumbled backward, shaking her head, her tears spilling freely now. You're lying," she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Aiden didn't flinch. "I'm not." His words were final. Sophia's knees buckled beneath her, and for a second, she felt like she was drowning in a sea of pain, humiliation, and unbearable betrayal. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest, trying to hold herself together, but she was falling apart. Her entire life had been meticulously planned. Aiden was supposed to be hers. Their marriage was supposed to be perfect. She had done everything right. And yet, on the very night that was meant to seal their love forever, he had chosen someone else. Not another socialite, not another heiress, but a maid. A simple brown-skinned girl who had nothing to offer. Isla's guilt. Isla's throat burned with guilt and shame. She wanted to speak, wanted to apologize. But what could she say? Nothing could erase the pain in Sophia's eyes. Nothing could fix what had been destroyed. She tightened the sheet around herself, her nails digging into the fabric as if it could shield her from Sophia's fury. I didn't mean for this to happen, Isla whispered, her voice shaky. Shut up! Sophia's rage snapped like a whip, her once graceful composure shattered beyond repair. Isla's breath caught in her throat. You didn't mean for this to happen? Sophia's laugh was hollow, bitter. You didn't mean to sneak into my husband's bed? To let him touch you? Isla flinched as if she'd been slapped. Tears welled in her eyes. I swear, I never… Sophia cut her off with a harsh glare, her eyes burning with hatred. I trusted you. Her voice was soft, but the pain behind it sliced through Isla like a knife. Sophia turned back to Aiden, her hands trembling at her sides. Her tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to look at him, to look at the man she had loved. Tell me, she whispered. Tell me why. Aiden exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand down his face. I never wanted this marriage, Sophia, he admitted. You know that. Sophia's heart lurched. She knew he hadn't loved her, but she had hoped. Hoped that one day he would. Hoped that she could make him love her. But now she saw the truth. He had never belonged to her. He had belonged to Isla from the moment he saw her. Sophia swallowed back the sob rising in her throat. She was losing him. No, she had already lost him. She wiped her tears away, straightened her back, and lifted her chin. She refused to let them see her break. You love her? Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it echoed through the room like a death sentence. Aiden didn't hesitate. Yes. Sophia felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. For a long moment she just stood there, her heart bleeding, her world collapsing around her. Then with one final breath, she turned to Isla. And what she said next shocked everyone. I hope you know, she whispered, her lips trembling. You will never be enough for him. Isla's eyes widened, her breath catching. Sophia didn't wait for a response. She spun around, her dress flowing behind her like a storm, and she walked away. This time she didn't look back. But the moment she disappeared down the hall, Aiden clenched his jaw, because despite his cold exterior, something inside him twisted painfully. Had he truly done the right thing, or had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? The aftermath begins. The moment Sophia stormed out of the room, the walls of Aiden Blackwood's world began to crumble. What happened that night was no longer just a private betrayal. It was about to become a public scandal. And scandals like this, they didn't just disappear. By the time the morning sun fully rose, the Monroe family had already found out. Sophia's mother, Eleanor Monroe, a woman known for her ruthless control and icy demeanor, was the first to react. He did what? Her voice boomed across the estate as the news reached her. With trembling hands, she clutched her pearl necklace, her face drained of color. Her husband, Charles Monroe, stood frozen, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like he was about to shatter his own teeth. Aiden Blackwood had humiliated their daughter, on her wedding night, with a maid. The scandal wasn't just a betrayal, it was an unforgivable disgrace to their family name. The guests' whispers outside the mansion. Whispers spread like wildfire. Guests who had been drinking champagne the night before were now hunched over their phones, reading the explosive headlines. Millionaire groom spends wedding night with bride's maid. Blackwood Empire CEO caught in shocking affair. With a servant? The Monroe family's elite guests murmured among themselves. He ruined Sophia in front of everyone, one socialite whispered, sipping her espresso with thinly veiled disgust. He's always been reckless, but this, another said, shaking her head, this is career suicide. And the worst part? Sophia had locked herself in her room, refusing to speak. She was utterly humiliated. And Aiden? He didn't care. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Isla's guilt and fear. Inside the estate, Isla Ramirez sat frozen on the edge of a bed that didn't belong to her. Aiden's bed. Her fingers gripped the sheets tightly, her nails digging into the fabric as a suffocating wave of guilt and fear crashed over her. She had never meant for this to happen. She had never wanted to destroy a marriage. Yet here she was, the center of a storm she couldn't control. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up, her hands shaking. A message flashed across the screen. "You disgusting homewrecker, leave before it's too late." Isla's stomach dropped. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears as she scrolled down. More messages, more threats, more hatred. "You think a man like Aiden will choose a maid like you? You ruined Sophia's life. Karma will ruin yours." Tears welled in her eyes, her breathing ragged. She had to leave. Now Aiden's possessiveness. But when she stood up to pack her things, the bedroom door swung open. Aiden stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking her escape, his expression unreadable. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying edge to it. Isla swallowed hard. She needed to be strong. I can't stay here," she whispered. This, this was a mistake. I should go before things get worse." But before she could take a step, Aiden moved, fast. His hand snaked around her wrist, stopping her. His grip was firm, but not forceful. Still, Isla's breath hitched. The air between them grew heavy. Aiden studied her, his blue eyes darkening. "I won't let you go," he said, his voice low. Isla's heart skipped a beat. "Aiden, please," she begged. "I've already ruined everything. Sophia, she doesn't deserve this." For the first time, Aiden's jaw tightened. "She was never the one for me," he said. "You are." His words sent shivers down Isla's spine, but she couldn't let them consume her. Not when she had already lost so much. "I can't be the reason you throw everything away," she whispered, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Aiden cupped her face, tilting her chin up. "You're not the reason," he said softly. "You're the only thing that makes sense to me right now." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was trapped between her guilt and his desire. And worst of all, she didn't know which one would destroy her first. The Monroe family's revenge. Meanwhile, downstairs in the Grand Monroe estate, Sophia's mother paced the floor, her silk robe trailing behind her as she fumed. She turned to her husband. "We need to handle this," she snapped. "Aiden thinks he can humiliate our family and walk away?" Her husband nodded slowly, his face grim. "We'll make him regret this," he said. A knowing, dangerous look passed between them, because one thing was certain. The Monroe family never forgave betrayals, and Hila Ramirez, she was about to learn that the hard way. The announcement that stuns the world. The grand ballroom of the Monroe estate had never been so silent. The guests, an elite crowd of billionaires, socialites, and media personalities, stood frozen in shock. Cameras flashed, murmurs filled the air, and gasps echoed through the massive hall. At the center of it all, Aiden Blackwood stood tall, his deep blue eyes locked onto Hila Ramirez. His voice boomed through the room, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I am leaving Sophia." The words hung in the air, heavier than the crystal chandelier above them. The whispers turned into a roar. Sophia, standing just a few feet away, felt the world tilt beneath her. Her perfectly planned future, her husband, her status, her life, was shattering before her eyes. Her breath hitched. Then, Aiden took a deep breath and continued. "I don't care about wealth or status. I don't care about arranged marriages. I don't care about society's expectations." His voice softened, filled with an undeniable warmth. "I want love, and Isla is my love." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sophia staggered back, her face pale as tears spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Not only had Aiden betrayed her, he was now choosing a maid over her, over the Monroe legacy, over everything. Isla's heart stops. Meanwhile, Isla stood frozen, her breath shallow. Her brown eyes were wide, her pulse racing. This couldn't be real. She had spent the last 24 hours being hated, insulted, and threatened. And now, Aiden was proposing publicly. She could hear the murmurs. "He's insane. Does he really love her? This girl just destroyed Sophia's life." Her body tensed, her mind screaming at her to run. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a nightmare. Aiden turned to her, his gaze soft but determined. He stepped closer, and before she could even process what was happening, he knelt down, right there, in front of everyone. A sharp gasp came from the crowd. Even the reporters stopped clicking their cameras. No one had expected this. No one. Aiden pulled out a ring, an elegant, breathtaking diamond. It sparkled under the golden lights, but Isla's hands shook. She took a shaky step back. This was wrong. This was crazy. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be in Sophia's place. Tears blurred her vision. Aiden, I can't, she whispered, but his expression didn't waver. You can, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. He reached for her hand, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her frozen body. I love you, Isla, he murmured. I won't let anyone come between us. His words made her chest tighten, because she wanted to believe them. But how could she, when the whole world was against them? Sophia's collapse. A choked sob broke through the room. Sophia. Her mascara-streaked face twisted in pain as she clutched her chest. Her body trembled, her hands balled into fists. The humiliation was too much. Her world, her name, her dignity, destroyed. And then, with one final shaky breath, Sophia's knees buckled. She collapsed. A scream echoed through the hall. Someone help her! Aiden turned, his brows furrowing as he saw his bride, or rather, his ex-bride, lying limp on the floor. But even as the guests rushed toward her, his grip on Isla tightened. He wasn't going to let her go. Not now. Not ever. The Monroe family's fury, Eleanor Monroe stormed forward, her face red with rage. You think you can humiliate us like this? She hissed, glaring at Aiden with pure hatred. Charles Monroe, standing beside her, barely contained his anger. This marriage was a business deal, Aiden, he snapped. Do you have any idea what you've done? Aiden's jaw tightened. I've chosen love, he said. Something you and your family know nothing about. Eleanor's lips curled. You think this girl is worth it? She sneered, glaring at Isla. Isla flinched, shame burning through her. She felt small, weak. But Aiden's grip tightened around her hand. She's worth everything, he said firmly. For a moment, a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, Eleanor let out a slow, dangerous laugh. Fine, she whispered. Her gaze turned icy. If you want to throw away everything for this maid, then so be it. She turned to her husband. Cut off the Blackwood contract, she ordered. Charles Monroe's expression darkened, but he nodded. Effective immediately, he said. The words hit like a knife. The Blackwood-Monroe alliance was worth billions. Without it, Aiden stood to lose everything. Gasps filled the room as the guests watched in shock. But Aiden? He simply smirked. Go ahead, he said. I don't need your money. The Monroes stiffened. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. This isn't over, she warned. Aiden simply pulled Isla closer. Oh, I know, he said. And as the Monroes walked away, he turned back to Isla, the only woman he would ever fight for, the only woman who had ever made him feel alive. Say yes, he whispered. And this time, she didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply let herself fall, into his arms, into his love, into a future she never dared to dream. As the world watched in shock, Isla whispered the one word that changed everything. Yes. The weight of the world, Isla couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as she stood in front of the massive mansion doors. The night air was cold, unforgiving. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to leave. There was no other way. Ever since Aiden's shocking proposal, her life had turned into a nightmare. The media had slaughtered her reputation. Gold digger, homewrecker, a maid who stole a millionaire. Sophia's family had declared war on Aiden. Her face was plastered on every news channel, her name dragged through the dirt. She couldn't walk outside without being hounded by reporters, their flashing cameras blinding her. And Aiden? Aiden had lost everything. His once unshakable empire was crumbling. He had sacrificed his reputation, his business deals, his family name, for her, for a maid. The guilt was suffocating. This was her fault. She had ruined him. She had to fix it. She had to disappear. So, with one final shaky breath, she ran, vanishing, without a trace. Isla didn't look back as she slipped through the iron gates. She didn't let herself feel. She just moved. Her feet pounded against the pavement, her pulse thundering in her ears. She had nowhere to go, no money, no family, but she had to run. Far, away from Aiden, away from the Monroes, away from a love that was destroying them both. She hopped onto the first bus she saw, her fingers trembling as she clutched her coat tighter. She kept her head down, her long dark hair covering her face. Nobody could know who she was. She had to disappear. Aiden's madness begins. The next morning, Aiden woke up to an empty bed. At first, he thought she had just gone to get some air. But then, the staff told him, "She's gone." His heart stopped. "No," he whispered. "No, she wouldn't." But the security footage showed it. Isla, running, disappearing into the night. His world shattered. "Find her!" he roared, his voice echoing through the mansion. His men scattered, searching every corner of the city. Days passed, then weeks, and still, nothing. She was gone, vanished, like she had never existed. Aiden went mad. He barely ate, barely slept. His once flawless suits were now wrinkled, his hair a mess. He ignored his business, ignored his friends. His empire was crumbling, and he didn't care. Because without her, none of it mattered. She was his life, and now, she was gone. A world without Isla. Every night, Aiden sat in their room, the bed they had shared, the pillow that still smelled like her red dress still folded on the chair. Memories of her haunted him, her soft laughter, her nervous touches, the way her eyes had held fear and love at the same time, and the way she had whispered, "I love you." Aiden's fingers curled into fists. She had loved him. So why had she run? Why had she left him to suffer? He had given up everything for her. And now she was nowhere. His hands shook. He needed her. He needed her like air. And he would find her. No matter what it took. No matter where she had hidden. Aiden Blackwood never gave up. And he wasn't about to start now. A man on the edge. Aiden Blackwood was a man feared by the world. A ruthless businessman. A cold-hearted CEO. A billionaire who never lost. Yet now, he was losing his mind. It had been a month since Isla vanished. A month of searching. A month of desperation. He had spent millions hiring the best private detectives. He had searched every city, every town, every street. But Isla was nowhere. She had disappeared like a ghost. And with each passing day, a dark, unbearable truth settled in his chest. He was never going to find her. The thought shattered him. He barely recognized himself anymore. His once flawless suits were now loose on his body because he had stopped eating. His sharp green eyes were tired, hollow, lifeless, because he had stopped sleeping. The powerful, untouchable Aiden Blackwood was now a man destroyed by love, a search that leads nowhere. Aiden's men were working day and night, scanning security footage, tracking phone records, bribing people for information, but every lead ended the same way. Nowhere. His private investigator, Jonathan Carter, stood in front of him, looking uneasy. "Sir," Jonathan hesitated, "we've checked airports, train stations, hotels, and—" Aiden's voice was sharp, desperate. Jonathan sighed. "It's like she never existed." Aiden's hands curled into fists. His breathing was ragged. "No." He shook his head. "Find her, no matter what it takes." Drowning in regret, Aiden sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the glass of whiskey in his hand. He never used to drink, but now, it was the only thing that numbed the pain. He thought about Isla, her smile, her nervous laugh, the way she melted in his arms, and then the way she had run. Did she hate him now? Did she regret that night? Did she think he had ruined her life? Aiden let out a shaky breath. The pain in his chest was unbearable. He had everything, money, power, luxury, But without her, it meant nothing. The $1 billion reward. On the 40th day of Isla's disappearance, Aiden did something drastic. He put out $1 billion reward. $1 billion to anyone who finds Isla Ramirez. It was madness. The media exploded. His business partners thought he had lost his mind. Aiden, stop this! His assistant Daniel tried to reason with him. You're making a fool of yourself. She's just a maid. Aiden's fist slammed against the desk. She is not just a maid, he roared. She's the woman I love. The entire office fell silent. Aiden's chest heaved as he tried to control his anger. Then in a quieter voice, he whispered, and I will find her. Losing all hope, days passed, then weeks. The reward brought in thousands of tips, but none of them led to Isla. Aiden had spent a fortune, yet he was still empty-handed. Hopelessness began to creep in. He had done everything. He had searched everywhere. And still, she was gone. Aiden sat in his office, head in his hands. For the first time in his life, he felt defeated. Maybe Isla didn't want to be found. Maybe she had moved on, and the thought of that ripped him apart. But then, on a cold, quiet night, his phone rang, and everything changed. A chance encounter. It had been 60 days since Isla disappeared. 60 days of torment. 60 days of searching. And then, fate intervened. Aiden Blackwood wasn't supposed to be in that part of town. His meetings were usually held in luxury skyscrapers, not in small coffee shops on a quiet street. But that morning, something pulled him there. Something he couldn't explain. And that's when he saw her. A changed woman, Isla Ramirez. The woman who had shattered him. The woman he had searched for endlessly. She was standing behind the counter taking orders, dressed in a simple white blouse and a black skirt. No designer dresses, no diamond jewelry. Yet she was still the most breathtaking woman he had ever seen. But something about her was different. She looked stronger, independent. Her once timid eyes now held confidence. Her posture no longer carried fear. She had changed, and Aiden couldn't breathe. The moment she sees him, Isla laughed at something a customer said. Her voice, God, her voice. It had haunted Aiden for weeks. And now, it was right in front of him. She turned, grabbing a tray of coffee cups. And then, her eyes met his. Aiden saw it happen, saw her body go still, saw the shock flicker across her face. For a second, just a second, her lips parted as if to say something. Then, she turned to run. Aiden won't let her go, not this time. Aiden's body moved before he could think. Fast, determined, unstoppable. He shoved past tables, nearly knocking over a waiter. Customers gasped as he grabbed Isla's wrist. Her body tensed. Let me go, Aiden, she whispered, voice shaking. He didn't. He couldn't. Instead, his grip tightened. Not again. His voice was hoarse, broken. I won't lose you again. The struggle between love and fear. Isla struggled, tried to break free, but Aiden was too strong. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of herself, afraid of the way her heart betrayed her, afraid of the fire in his green eyes, afraid of the memories crashing down on her, the way he had kissed her, the way he had whispered her name, the way she had surrendered to him. Number that she had worked too hard to rebuild her life. She wouldn't go back. She couldn't. Aiden's desperation. Aiden saw the battle in her eyes, saw the way she was fighting herself. His grip softened. I searched for you. His voice was raw. Everywhere. Isla looked away. I didn't want to be found, she said, barely above a whisper. That hurt, like a knife to his chest, but Aiden refused to back down. I love you, he admitted. I've always loved you. Isla squeezed her eyes shut. Stop. But he didn't. Come back to me, Isla. His voice cracked. She opened her eyes and Aiden saw it. The tears, the emotions she was trying to hide. And he knew. She still loved him. The final plea. Just listen, Aiden begged. Give me one night, one chance to explain. And if you still want to walk away, I'll let you go. Isla's chest rose and fell. A war raged inside her. And then finally, she whispered, one night. Aiden let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, because deep down, he knew. One night would never be enough. Aiden's plea for a second chance. Aiden sat across from Isla in the dimly lit cafe. It was the first time in weeks that she was this close to him, and yet she felt a million miles away. She avoided his eyes, stirring the coffee she hadn't taken a sip of. Aiden's heart pounded as he watched her. She was here, finally. But he knew one thing. This was his last chance. He leaned forward, voice low, almost pleading. Isla, I made mistakes. I was reckless, selfish, but not once did I regret loving you. She flinched at the word love. Aiden, she exhaled, shaking her head. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, he argued, desperation creeping into his voice. You love me and I love you. That's all that should matter. She laughed bitterly. You don't get it, do you? I'm the woman who ruined a marriage. I'm the one people whisper about. I'm the... He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. You are the woman who stole my heart, the woman who made me feel alive. Her fingers trembled beneath his, but she didn't pull away. For the first time, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Hope. Isla's resistance. Isla's heart screamed at her to believe him, but her mind reminded her of the pain, of Sophia's tears, of the guilt that followed her everywhere she went. She yanked her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. No, Aiden, it's not just about us. Your ex-wife, her family, the media. Do you know what they call me? Aiden clenched his jaw. I don't care what they say. Well, I do, she snapped, eyes flashing. Silence hung between them, thick with emotions neither could contain. Isla exhaled shakily. I built a new life, a simple one. No cameras, no judgment, just peace. Aiden swallowed hard. But are you happy? Her lips parted, but no words came. That was all the answer he needed. Aiden's proof of love. Aiden reached into his coat pocket and placed a thick envelope on the table. She frowned. What is this? My final act of love, he said. Isla hesitated before picking it up. Her fingers tore it open, revealing legal documents. Her breath hitched as she read the words. Finalized divorce agreement. Sophia Monroe and Aiden Blackwood. She looked up, confused. I divorced Sophia 2 weeks after you left, he admitted. I didn't want to be married to someone I didn't love, and I refused to chase after you while still being legally tied to another woman. Isla blinked, trying to process. Aiden leaned forward. I chose you, even when you weren't there. Even when the world turned against me. I chose you. Her vision blurred with tears. The moment of truth. Aiden reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a small velvet box. Isla's breath caught in her throat. No, she whispered. But Aiden was already getting down on one knee. The cafe fell silent. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. Every pair of eyes turned toward them. But Aiden only saw her. I made the mistake of letting you go once, he said, voice thick with emotion. I won't make it again. The box snapped open, revealing a stunning diamond ring. Gasps echoed in the cafe. I love you, Isla, and I will spend every day proving it to you. Will you marry me? Isla's choice tears slipped down Isla's cheeks. Aiden watched her, heart pounding. Would she say yes? Would she finally accept that they were meant to be? Her lips trembled, her hands balled into fists. And then she ran. Aiden's heart shattered. Aiden's unshakable determination. Aiden sat alone in his mansion, staring at the divorce papers on his desk. His heart felt lighter, yet a painful void remained. Sophia was officially out of his life. There was no more guilt, no more obligations. Only one truth remained. He wanted Isla. No matter how much she ran, no matter how hard she resisted, he knew she loved him. He saw it in her eyes, felt it in every trembling breath they had shared. And this time, he wouldn't let her slip away. Grabbing his phone, he dialed a number. Set up a wedding, he ordered. His assistant hesitated. Sir, with whom? Aiden's lips curled into a determined smirk. With the only woman who owns my heart, Isla. Isla's conflicted heart. Isla sat by the window of her small apartment, staring at the rain-soaked streets below. Her heart still ached from running away from Aiden's proposal. But could she really walk away from him forever? She touched the velvet box that lay unopened on her dresser. The ring he had proposed with. Tears stung her eyes. How could she love him so much and still be so afraid? Just then, a soft knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She opened it cautiously, only to find a delivery man holding a beautiful white envelope. "For you, miss." With shaky fingers, Isla opened it. Inside was a handwritten note in Aiden's strong, elegant script. "Meet me at the Blackwood estate. One last time." Her heart pounded. She knew if she went there, she might never leave again. But deep down, wasn't that what she wanted? The unexpected wedding Isla arrived at the Blackwood estate just before sunset. The air was crisp, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold. As she stepped inside, she gasped. The entire mansion was transformed. No extravagant decorations, no hundreds of guests, just soft candlelight, elegant white flowers, and a wedding altar at the center of the grand hall. Aiden stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, his eyes locked onto hers. Her breath hitched. I don't understand," she whispered. Aiden stepped forward, his voice steady. "This is the wedding that should have been, Isla. The wedding where I stand before you, not as a millionaire, not as a CEO, but as a man who loves you." Tears welled in her eyes. No press, no socialites, just us. He took another step closer. "I don't care if we don't have the perfect past. I only care about the future we can have together. A future where you are my wife." Her heart raced. But I ran," Aiden smiled. "And I chased." Isla let out a soft, tearful laugh. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out the same ring. Her ring. His voice was thick with emotion. "This is your last chance to run, Isla. But if you stay, you'll never have to run again." A love that couldn't be denied, silence hung between them. The moment stretched on, heavy with unspoken emotions. Then Isla did the one thing Aiden had prayed for. She took a slow step forward, then another, until she was right in front of him. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his hand, and then finally, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Aiden, I'll marry you." The world disappeared. Aiden cupped her face, his lips crashing into hers in a kiss so deep, so full of love, that she felt her soul melt into his. The guests, just a handful of close friends, erupted into cheers. A minister stepped forward, and just like that, Aiden and Isla became husband and wife. A new beginning. That night, as Isla lay in Aiden's arms, she finally understood what love truly was. It wasn't about wealth, it wasn't about status, it was about choosing someone, over and over again, no matter what. Aiden pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're mine now, Isla, and I will spend every day proving that I deserve you." She smiled, nestling closer. She had spent so long running from him. Now, she never wanted to leave his side again. A wedding meant to be the grand hall of the Blackwood estate was bathed in golden candlelight, the air thick with the scent of fresh roses. There were no extravagant decorations, no high society guests, just an intimate gathering of people who truly cared. At the center of it all stood Isla. She wore a gown as simple as her soul, flowing ivory silk that cascaded down her body, hugging her curves with effortless grace. A delicate veil framed her radiant face, her brown skin glowing under the soft chandeliers. Across the aisle, Aiden Blackwood stood waiting, his breath caught in his throat as Isla stepped forward, her every movement stealing another piece of his heart. She was breathtaking, mesmerizing, his queen. Their eyes met, and in that instant, everything else faded away. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a promise that no scandal, no betrayal, no force in the world could ever break them apart again. The vows that changed everything. As Isla reached him, Aiden gently took her trembling hands in his. His deep blue eyes shone with emotion, his voice steady, yet full of unspoken passion. "This is the wedding that was meant to be," he whispered, his thumb softly stroking her fingers. Tears welled in Isla's eyes. "Aiden, she murmured, her voice trembling with raw emotion. From the moment you saw me, you shattered every wall I built. You made me believe in love, even when I was too afraid to trust it. Aiden exhaled slowly, his grip on her tightening. And you, he said, voice thick with emotion, showed me what true love feels like. You are my heart, my soul, my everything. The small crowd around them grew silent, as if the universe itself held its breath for this moment. Then, with eyes locked and hearts racing, Ayla whispered the words that would seal their fate forever. Yes. With a radiant smile, Aiden slid the wedding band onto her delicate finger, sealing their bond. You are mine now, Ayla, he whispered, pressing a kiss against her knuckles, and I am forever yours. From scandal to love's victory. Outside the mansion, whispers of scandal still lingered. Some still gossiped about the billionaire who left his socialite wife for a mere maid. But Aiden didn't care. Neither did Ayla. They had built their love in the ashes of betrayal, survived the fire of judgment, and emerged stronger than ever. That night, as they swayed together under the soft glow of the moon, Ayla rested her head against his chest. I never imagined this, she admitted softly. Aiden cupped her face, tilting her chin so she could see the depth of his love in his eyes. Neither did I, he whispered, but fate knew better. And with that, he captured her lips in a kiss that held everything. Every stolen glance, every forbidden touch, every battle fought for love. The world had called her a maid, but tonight she was his queen, the queen of a millionaire's heart.